March 1945. A road in northern Germany. General Omar Bradley was heading back to headquarters after inspecting forward positions. It was late, almost 8 in the evening. His convoy passed a church converted into a field hospital. The lights were on, there was activity inside, and there was something outside. Bradley told the driver to stop. He got out of the jeep. There were men lying on the ground, on blankets, on the cold March grass. American uniforms, bandages, dried blood on the gauze. Bradley counted 16 men, all black. He walked up to the nearest one, a sergeant, hand bandaged to the elbow. "Why are you out here?" The sergeant looked at him, saw the stars on the helmet. It took him a moment to answer. "They told us the hospital was full, sir." Bradley looked at the church. Through the windows, he could see beds, medical staff moving between them. Light, warmth. "How long have you been out here?" "Since this afternoon, sir. About 4 hours." Bradley said nothing else. He turned to his aide. "Get me the commander of this hospital." What happened over the next 20 minutes would change how field hospitals in the 12th Army Group operated for the rest of the war. Before we continue, subscribe if you haven't already. We tell the stories of World War II the textbooks leave out, the ones that show that sometimes the hardest enemy wasn't across the front line. To understand what happened outside that church in March 1945, you need to understand the context those 16 men were living in. The American Army in World War II was a segregated army, not informally, but officially as institutional policy. Black soldiers served in separate units, slept in separate barracks, ate in separate mess halls, received medical treatment in separate facilities. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't an anomaly. It was the norm. And that norm had a long, well-documented history the American Army had carried since the Civil War, 80 years earlier. The 16 men lying on the ground outside that church in Germany weren't an exception to the system. They were the system working exactly as it had been designed. They'd fought. They'd been wounded. They'd arrived at the nearest field hospital seeking treatment, and they'd been left outside. Not because there was no room, but because the room available wasn't designated for them. That was what Bradley was looking at when he saw those 16 blankets on the cold grass. Not a mistake, not negligence, a policy. The hospital's commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel Richard Marsh, 43 years old, from Virginia, a physician by training, 12 years in the Army Medical Corps. He came out of the church, still wearing his white coat, saw Bradley, and saluted. Bradley didn't return the salute. He pointed at the men on the ground. "Explain this to me." Marsh looked at the 16 men, then looked at Bradley. "Sir, the hospital is operating at full capacity. We don't have beds available for—" "For who?" Marsh hesitated. "For colored soldiers, sir. Our facility isn't designated for integrated care. Protocol requires wounded black soldiers to be referred to colored medical units." "And where's the nearest colored medical unit?" "About 20 miles from here, sir." Bradley looked at the sergeant with the bandaged hand, then at the others. One had chest bandages that had started to darken again. Another had his leg immobilized with an improvised splint. "How many beds does this hospital have?" 50, sir." "How many are occupied?" Marsh hesitated. 46, sir." Bradley did the math in silence. 4 empty beds, 16 men on the ground. He turned to Marsh. "Lieutenant Colonel, how long have these men been out here?" "About 4 hours, sir." "And in those 4 hours, you haven't found a way to treat them?" "Sir, protocol establishes—" "Protocol." Bradley cut him off. "I don't care about that right now. What I care about is why there are 16 wounded American soldiers on the ground outside a hospital with empty beds inside." "Sir, If I integrate the wards, I have a problem with the other patients. There have already been complaints at other hospitals. When? Complaints about what? Yes, sir. Some soldiers refuse to share a ward with... Bradley raised a hand. Marsh stopped talking. Bradley walked slowly over to the man with the chest bandages and crouched down beside him. What's your name? Corporal James Whitfield, sir. 10th Mountain Division. When were you wounded? Day before yesterday, sir, on a reconnaissance near Hamel. Have your bandages been changed since then? No, sir. Bradley looked at the darkened bandage, then stood and turned back to Marsh. This man has had the same bandage for 2 days. There's a risk of infection. Sir, that's also covered by protocol. Marsh didn't answer. Listen to me carefully, Lieutenant Colonel. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. You're going to walk into that hospital. You're going to take every patient who can be moved without risking their recovery, and you're going to seat them in a chair. Whatever beds free up, you're going to give to these men. Whoever doesn't fit in a bed, you're bringing inside anyway. On the floor if you have to, but inside, warm, and getting medical attention. Marsh opened his mouth. Bradley kept going without a pause. And if in 10 minutes there's a single wounded American soldier still on this ground, I'm relieving you of command of this hospital, and I'm opening a disciplinary file against you for dereliction of duty. A pause. Do you understand what I've just told you? Yes, sir. Then move. Marsh went into the church. Bradley stayed outside. He didn't get back in the jeep. He didn't go wait somewhere more comfortable. He stood next to the 16 men on the ground and waited with them. His aide approached. Sir, we could wait inside. Bradley didn't move. These men have been here 4 hours. I can wait 10 minutes. The aide said nothing else. 5 minutes later, stretcher bearers started coming out of the church. The 16 men went in one at a time. Those who could walk, walked. Those who couldn't were carried in on stretchers. Corporal Whitfield was the last to go in. As his stretcher passed Bradley, he looked up at him. Thank you, sir. Bradley nodded. Rest up. What happened inside the church that night was uncomfortable. 3 patients who could be moved without risk were pulled from their beds to make room. 2 accepted it without comment. 1 protested loudly. Bradley was inside when it happened. The soldier protesting was an artillery corporal with his arm in a sling. He pointed at the black men being settled into beds and told the orderly he wasn't going to stay in the same ward. Bradley walked over. The corporal saw him and snapped to attention instinctively. At ease, Bradley told him. Then he asked for his name and his unit. The corporal answered. Bradley nodded. Do you know where your unit was last week? Yes, sir, at the Vezzer crossing. And do you know which unit covered your left flank during that crossing? The corporal didn't answer. Bradley gestured toward one of the men who had just been brought in. The 761st Tank Battalion, known as the Black Panthers. They covered your left flank for 72 hours, so your unit could cross that river. A pause. Right now, that man needs a bed, and you can sit in a chair. The corporal looked down at the floor. Yes, sir. He got up and gave up the bed without another word. Bradley left the hospital 90 minutes after arriving. Before getting back in the jeep, he pulled Marsh aside. What happened here tonight doesn't happen again. Not in any hospital under my command. Is that clear? Marsh nodded. If a single report reaches me of a wounded soldier being turned away or left outside a hospital for reasons that aren't strictly medical, I will prosecute. Not transfer. Prosecute. Yes, sir. And tomorrow, I want a report on Corporal Whitfield's condition. Yes, sir. Bradley got into the jeep. As they pulled away down the dark road, his aide spoke from the back seat. "Sir, do you think this changes anything? It's just one hospital." Bradley looked out the window for a moment. "Tonight, 16 men are inside instead of outside. That's something." Corporal James Whitfield was treated for 4 days at that hospital. The chest wound required surgery. He made it in time. According to the surgeon who operated on him, without the extra 4 hours of waiting in the cold that night, the outcome would have been the same either way. But with them, it had been an unnecessary risk. Whitfield survived. He returned to his unit 3 weeks later. The 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, kept fighting until the end of the war. They crossed Germany with the Third Army. They helped liberate several forced labor camps in Austria. After the war, the battalion was disbanded without official ceremony. Its men went home on transport ships separate from white soldiers. The American Army wasn't desegregated until 1948, when President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, 3 years after the war ended. Marsh was transferred to another hospital a few weeks after the incident. The official record doesn't state the reason for the transfer. Bradley never spoke publicly about that night. There's only one reference to it in his memoirs. A single line in a chapter on medical conditions in the European theater. He wrote that segregation in field hospitals had been one of the most serious inefficiencies in the American military medical system during the war, and that he had taken steps to correct it in the hospitals under his direct command. One line, for a night 16 men would remember for the rest of their lives. The story of that field hospital in Germany in March 1945 raises a question that reaches far beyond World War II. What does it take for someone with power to use that power to do the right thing when the right thing goes against the established norm? Bradley wasn't a revolutionary. He wasn't an activist. He was an American general who had grown up in a country where segregation was legal, institutional, and accepted by the majority. And that night, in front of a church in Germany, he saw 16 men on the ground and made a decision. He didn't change the system that night. The system kept working the same way in other hospitals, in other sectors, in other countries. But in that hospital, that night, 16 men went inside when they should have stayed out. And sometimes history isn't made by the people who change the systems. It's made by the people who, in one specific moment, decide that an unjust rule isn't going to apply while they're watching. That's not enough, but it's something. And Corporal James Whitfield, who lived to go home and have children and grandchildren, probably thought it was quite a bit more than nothing. Do you think Bradley did enough that night, or should he have gone further? And do you think a leader has an obligation to challenge the unjust rules of the system they operate in, even when it costs them something? Leave us your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more World War II stories that show the most important battles weren't always fought with weapons, subscribe. Every week, a new story. Every week, a question with no easy answer.